It's hard to think of an ideal more American than the freedom of speech. When people say our soldiers fight and die for our values, what they mean is our freedom to say what we think is true. That's our birthright. It's the most important thing we have.
The restriction of free speech by social media companies is something that represents a threat to our democratic society. We, as social media users, rely on the free and open exchange of information to voice our opinions and come to the ballot box as well informed as we can be. According to the Cardozo Law Review, the majority of U.S. adults, 62%, get news on social media, and 18% do so often. Since so many people get their news from social media, we are starting to see social media companies editorialize and become gatekeepers of not only information, but of the truth itself. The act of speaking freely and the threats that we face to it are therefore not just a matter of our individual freedom, but a matter of our destiny as a nation.
And that brings us to where we are today. According to a study done by the Pew Research Center, the majority of Americans agree with the statement that social media platforms censor political viewpoints. This consists of 90% of those who are Republican or lean Republican, and 59% of those who lean towards the Democratic Party. This is just one small part of the greater attack on free and open discourse that we see not only from big tech, but from governments around the world. Freedom House, which is a non-profit, U.S. government-funded think tank based in Washington, D.C., has stated that global internet freedom has declined for the 11th consecutive year, with over 55 countries having investigated, arrested, or convicted people for their social media posts.
At the end of the day, I would argue that free speech and tolerance, equality, etc. are compatible with each other. Because I believe that while free speech can be used to express ideas that we find to be abhorrent, we find to be wrong, just flat out wrong and incorrect, what free speech also allows is for us to respond to those ideas and to gather evidence and to express ourselves in a way that combats those perspectives and those ideas that we find to be wrong, wrong-headed, incorrect, or even dangerous.
The CEOs of social media companies have made remarks on censorship on their platforms. One prominent example of this is Jack Dorsey, the former CEO of Twitter, lamenting that accounts have to be removed. He said that banning accounts is a failure of Twitter to promote a healthy conversation on their platform, and said that it was dangerous for one individual or platform to have so much power over the public conversation. Despite his statements, we see that the words being said don't match up with the actions being taken, with many prominent accounts being removed arbitrarily without any explicit violation of the Twitter terms of service.
I am worried that these large social media companies can basically make a unilateral decision that this is out of bounds. And then with so many people using these sites as prime sources of information and discussion, that shuts out potentially important information and perspective from these sites, which have become, some would argue, they've become sort of like the public square of our time, Facebook and Twitter. I don't have a great idea of how to address this, but I do worry. I agree with the statement that perhaps I worry that perhaps they do have a little too much power. I think there's a debate to be had about what the government and other institutions and citizens can do to make sure that we have a robust debate and discussion in the public square.
Just like Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg has also exhibited this double standard in his speech and actions, which is unconducive to the robust debate that we desire.
Censorship is a tool that Facebook uses to track its users, not just on Facebook, but across the entire internet. Censorship tracks different profiles that a user visits, their message recipients, their linked accounts, the pages they visit around the web. Mr. Zuckerberg, how many accounts in the United States have been subject to review and shut down through Censorship?
Senator, I do not know because I'm not actually familiar with the name of that tool. I'm sure that we have tools that help us with our platform and community integrity work, but I am not familiar with that name.
Do you have a tool that does exactly what I've described and that you can see here over my shoulder? Or are you saying that that doesn't exist?
Senator, I'm saying that I'm not familiar with it.
The fact that the founder and CEO of Facebook is claiming not to know how his own platform is being run is appalling. We need to demand more accountability from big tech, and we need to do it now.
One thing I think is new is the phenomenon of, let's call it crowdsourced harassment, where someone with a large following online can basically point out a target for people's wrath and anger. And there's the phenomenon of doxing, right? Publishing people's personal information with the hope that the person publishing probably doesn't engage in the harassment him or herself, but basically done in hopes that other angry people will use that information to harass this person. And perhaps it's appropriate to address these incidents in things like new torts and new laws. There's the example of revenge porn, right? Publishing compromising photos to get back at someone that has ended a relationship with someone else, right? And states have passed some laws to address that. I don't know how successful they've been, but I wouldn't be against discussions of torts and laws that would address that kind of harassment that can occur in our digital age.
By changing the way in which the government and consumers interact with big tech, many of these issues can be resolved. Specifically, how can the state of Kentucky help protect its citizens against censorship? Well, in the Emory Law Journal, Elijah O'Kelly discusses how the U.S. Supreme Court actually allows state governments to apply the free speech clause of the Constitution to privately owned businesses. For example, in the court case Pruneyard Shopping Center versus Robbins, all the justices agreed that state courts can use their state constitution free speech clauses, which oftentimes are broader than the First Amendment, to apply to privately owned businesses without violating the United States Constitution. With this ability, state governments will be able to limit the ever-increasing control of these huge social media companies.
Facebook banned any post for 4 months about COVID coming from a lab. Of course, now even the Biden administration is looking into this. Right. Google, a Wall Street Journal reporter asked the head of Google's health division, notice that they don't do autofill searches for coronavirus lab leak the way they do it for any other question. And the guy said, well, we want to make sure the search isn't leading people down pathways that we would find to be not authoritative information. Well, you were wrong, Google and Facebook. Right. We don't know. The reason why we want you is because we're checking on this shit.
The Virginia Journal of International Law says that recently private companies have been implementing stricter censorship on their platforms. This move is troubling because it circumvents our public law and public accountability. These private regulatory systems, in essence, create a second set of private laws which often contradict the laws that have been set down publicly. These huge social media corporations, like Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, have continually shown how they have the power to limit our right to express our ideas and opinions. It is our job to take back some of this power. We, as citizens of Kentucky, have the power to reach out to our state officials and persuade them to take action against this social media censorship. By speaking up and making our voices heard, we can protect the fundamental rights and liberties that allow us to call ourselves Americans. Will you speak up?